2 o'clock in the afternoon, Wednesday, March 8th, 1916. A goods train pulls away from Brecon station with 2 locomotives coupled at the front. Standard practice for the Neath and Brecon railway said one engine could handle the climb through the Welsh mountains. The crew had other plans. In the next 8 hours, both engines would be buried in snow several hundred yards from any help, stranding a 13-wagon train in one of the loneliest places in Britain. This is the story of how a March blizzard trapped 2 steam locomotives on a mountain railway and exposed the fragility of wartime infrastructure. The Neath and Brecon Railway was never meant for winter operations at altitude. Built in 1867, the line climbed from sea level at Neath to over 1,000 feet in the Brecon beacons. Between Bulch and Penwilt, the track ran exposed across moorland where wind could build drifts 20 feet deep. The company knew this. Every winter brought delays. But March 1916 was different. Britain was 20 months into the Great War. Railway staff had been depleted by conscription. Maintenance crews were skeleton shifts. The permanent way gangs that normally kept cuttings clear had been reduced to old men and boys, and the War Office demanded constant freight movement. Coal from the valleys, livestock from the farms, military supplies heading to ports. The trains had to run. The blizzard started on Tuesday, March 7th. Weather stations recorded temperatures dropping to 23 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind from the northeast at 40 miles per hour, snow falling continuously. By midnight, drifts were forming across the mountain sections. The station master at Brecon received reports of difficult conditions, but no instruction to halt services. Wednesday morning. The scheduled goods train was prepared at Brecon Yard. 13 wagons, mixed freight. 2 tank engines assigned to the working. This was unusual. Typically, 1 locomotive hauled goods trains on this route. But the crews knew what was coming. They coupled both engines at the front. Double heading, extra power for the climb, extra weight to push through drifts. The guard's name was Thomas Evans, 47 years old, 22 years on the Neath and Brecon. He walked the length of the train at 1:45 p.m, checking couplings and brake connections. The snow was still falling. Visibility poor. He noted the conditions in his journal. Heavy snow continuing. Wind strong from northeast. Engines doubled for mountain crossing. 2 p.m. departure. The 2 locomotives pulled out of Brecon with Evans in the brake van at the rear. The crew consisted of 4 men on the engines, 2 drivers, 2 firemen. Their names are not recorded in surviving documents. What is recorded is the distance they travelled before everything stopped, approximately 11 miles. The climb from Brecon began immediately. The gradient steepened through Talybont on Usk. The double-headed train made slow progress. Snow accumulated on the track faster than the leading engine could clear it. The plough fitted buffer beam threw snow to both sides, but the drift depth was increasing. By 3 p.m, the train was moving at walking pace. Between Talybont and Torpentow, the line entered open moorland. No trees, no shelter. The full force of the blizzard hit the train. Wind speeds exceeded 50 miles per hour. Snow fell horizontally. The drivers could barely see the track ahead. They relied on memory and the gradient to guide them. The engines were working hard. Boiler pressure at maximum. Fireboxes roaring. Steam consumption heavy. At 3:35 p.m, the leading locomotive hit the drift. It wasn't gradual. The train had been pushing through accumulated snow for over 90 minutes. Then the track ahead disappeared into white. A drift that filled the cutting completely. No warning, no way to stop. The leading engine drove into snow that was taller than its chimney. The engine buried itself to the cab windows. Forward momentum ceased immediately. The second locomotive, still on clear track, pushed into the rear of the first. The collision was minor, no damage, but the effect was catastrophic. The leading engine's driving wheels lifted off the rails. Derailment. The locomotive tilted slightly to the left, settling into the drift at an angle. The coupling to the second engine held. The train behind remained on the rails, but the leading engine was finished, buried, immovable. Blocking the only railway line across this section of the Brecon beacons, Thomas Evans felt the impact in the brake van, the sudden stop, the lack of engine noise. He waited. Protocol said wait for signals from the crew. After 5 minutes, he climbed down into waist-deep snow and started walking forward. The walk took 20 minutes, 11 wagons, 1 locomotive still steaming on the track, then the buried engine. Evans reached the cab at 4 p.m. The crew were already out examining the situation. What they found was simple. The engine wasn't going anywhere without heavy equipment and a large workforce. The nearest signal box was Penwilt, 3 miles west. But the telegraph line between Bulch and Penwilt was down. Storm damage. The crew had no way to call for help from this location. They would have to walk. One of the firemen volunteered. His name is lost. What's recorded is that he left the train at 4:15 p.m. and walked west through the blizzard toward Penwilt. 3 miles. In near whiteout conditions. Temperature still in the low 20s. He reached Penwilt's signal box at 6:40 p.m. 2 hours and 25 minutes for a 3-mile walk. The signalman at Penwilt was William Morgan, 61 years old. He had been on duty since 6 a.m. and was scheduled to work until 10 p.m. 16-hour shifts were common during wartime. When the fireman arrived, Morgan immediately telegraphed Neath with the situation report. 2 engines derailed, train blocking line, location between Bulch and Penwilt, assistance required urgently. Neath received the message at 7 p.m. The Neath and Brecon Railway Company began organising a recovery operation. But this was wartime Britain. Resources were scarce. The company's breakdown crane was at Brecon, on the wrong side of the blockage. Heavy lifting equipment would need to come from Neath, and a workforce would need to be assembled. The workforce was the immediate problem. The railway employed fewer than 60% of its pre-war staff. The permanent way department had been gutted by conscription. Finding men to dig out 2 buried locomotives would require calling in every available worker. Station staff, signalmen off duty, yard workers, even office clerks. 23 men were mobilised from Neath by 9 p.m. They boarded a special train with shovels, picks and hand tools. No mechanical equipment, just muscle and determination. The train departed Neath at 9:30 p.m, reaching the western side of the drift at 11:15 p.m. Meanwhile, the stranded train crew waited in the darkness. The second locomotive kept steam up to provide warmth in the cab. The firemen fed coal into the firebox. The guards and drivers stayed in the cabs. Outside, the temperature dropped to 19 degrees. The blizzard continued. The rescue crew arrived at the drift at 11:30 p.m. By lamplight, they assessed the situation. The leading locomotive was buried under an estimated 200 tons of snow. The drift extended for approximately 300 yards along the cutting. Standard procedure said dig a channel wide enough for the locomotive to be pulled back. The crew began digging. 23 men, hand tools, 300 yards of packed snow. The work was brutal. Dig, throw, move forward, dig again. The snow was wind compressed, almost ice. Each shovelful required force. The men worked in shifts of 30 minutes before rotating to prevent exhaustion. Progress was measured in feet per hour. By 2 a.m. Thursday morning, March 9th, they had cleared 50 feet. The front of the buried locomotive became visible, the chimney, the dome, the cab roof, but the running gear remained buried. The driving wheels were still off the rails, sunk into snow that had compacted under the engine's weight. The temperature reached its lowest point at 4 a.m., 17 degrees Fahrenheit. Several workers showed signs of frostbite. The rescue coordinator made the decision to continue. Stopping meant the drift would refreeze harder. They had to finish. Dawn came at 6:30 a.m. Grey light revealed the full scale of the problem. The drift was even larger than estimated, 400 yards long, 20 feet deep at its maximum. The locomotive was buried to the running plate. The second engine stood idle on clear track, unable to provide pulling power because the derailed engine blocked movement. By 8 a.m. Thursday, the workforce had increased to 37 men. Additional workers arrived from Brecon on foot, having walked overnight through the mountains. They brought more tools, ropes, timber for shoring, and food for the crews who had been working for 9 hours straight. The digging continued through Thursday morning. By noon, the area around the derailed locomotive had been cleared enough to assess the lift required. The engine weighed 42 tons. It would need to be jacked up, the rails relayed beneath it, and then lowered back onto the track. This required the breakdown crane, but the crane was at Brecon, 12 miles away, on the wrong side of the blockage. The decision was made to dig out the second locomotive first. It remained on the rails and could be reversed back to Brecon once a clear path was established. The workforce shifted focus. By 4 p.m. Thursday, 30 hours after the derailment, the second locomotive was freed. It reversed slowly out of the drift, pulling the 13 wagons back toward Talybont. This left the leading engine alone in the cutting, buried, derailed, immovable, without heavy equipment. The recovery crew continued digging throughout Thursday night. By Friday morning, March 10th, they had cleared enough snow to access the running gear. Jacks were positioned under the frame, timber bulks were laid as supports, and the slow process of lifting began. 48 hours after the derailment, the locomotive was back on the rails, damaged but recoverable. A breakdown gang from Neath had walked the crane components over the mountain in pieces, reassembling them at the site. The lift took 6 hours. By Friday evening, the locomotive was coupled to a rescue engine and towed back to Neath for repairs. The line reopened on Saturday, March 11th, 72 hours after the blockage began. The delay had caused significant disruption to freight operations. Military supplies were rerouted through longer routes. Coal deliveries were delayed. Passenger services were cancelled for 3 days. The Neath and Brecon Railway Company conducted an investigation. The findings were straightforward. The blizzard was exceptional. The drift was unavoidable. But the decision to run the service during deteriorating conditions was questioned. The company defended the choice by citing wartime necessity. The trains had to run. No crew members were disciplined. The decision to double-head the train was praised as sound judgment. Without the second locomotive, the entire train would have been buried. The recovery would have taken weeks instead of days. The fireman who walked 3 miles through the blizzard to raise the alarm was commended. William Morgan, the signalman at Penwilt, received recognition for his rapid response. Thomas Evans, the guard, submitted a detailed incident report that became the primary historical record of the event. The buried locomotive returned to service in April 1916 after repairs. It operated on the Neath and Brecon Railway until nationalisation in 1948. The exact location of the derailment remained visible for decades. Railway workers called it the 16 Drift, a reference to the year. Old-timers would point out the cutting where the engines were trapped. The Neath and Brecon Railway never experienced another incident of this scale, but the March 1916 blizzard remained in company memory. It demonstrated what every railway worker already knew. In the Welsh mountains, winter was always the enemy. Snow could stop anything, even 2 locomotives working together. The line itself survived until 1962. Declining freight traffic and the rise of road transport made the mountain crossing uneconomic. The track between Brecon and Penwilt was lifted. The signal boxes were demolished. The cuttings where the drift formed are now footpaths. Walkers pass through without knowing what happened there. But the story remains. 2 engines derailed, 1 buried to the cab windows, 23 men digging through the night with hand tools, a fireman walking 3 miles in a blizzard to raise the alarm, a 72-hour recovery operation in wartime conditions, and a railway that kept running despite everything winter could throw at it. March 8th, 1916, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a goods train left Brecon with 2 locomotives. By 8 o'clock that evening, both were trapped in snow on the loneliest stretch of railway in Wales. The engines were freed, the line reopened, the trains kept running, because in wartime Britain, that's what had to happen.